Hi, everyone. I want to talk to you this week about something different. We're going to take a break from dolls, drag, toys, Star Trek, all of that. The only exception, if you look over my shoulder real quick, is double Cher. Cher is obviously a big time favorite of mine, always has been, and so I have two Cher dolls that are trying to fall over as we speak. And so I just wanted to show you those because this time around we're going to talk about Pride Month. And when I say that, I mean Pride Month because obviously June is Pride Month and I wanted to get it in before the end of June, but focusing on the progress that has been made in the gay and lesbian community in the last 30 years. Now, why do I mention 30 years? I want to talk a little bit about 30 years, and we're not going to talk about each one, don't get me wrong, but a little bit from those 30 years, because it's now been 30 years since I was outed. I didn't come out, I was outed by my mother when she did some snooping that she shouldn't have done, and she regretted when she found the truth. But anyway, I never had a chance to come out, at least to her. She did the work for me. So thank you, Mom. You saved me some effort. But anyway, so it's been 30 years since that time, which is really hard to believe when you think about it, how fast time flies. But also because in that 30 years, so much progress has been made. I mean, if you think back, so 30 years ago was in 1984, and I was a senior in high school, believe it or not. Again, hard to believe. And gay people were in such a different place than we are now. I mean, like I said, the progress has been amazing. If you fast forward just a few years from that, from in the late 80s, I was in a group called IYG here in Indiana and had a lot of amazing experiences. It was that stands for Indiana Youth Group, and of course, it was a youth group for gay, lesbian, bi, transgender teens, and it still is around today doing good work, so that's great. But we were in such a different environment then. And of course, the internet wasn't around, and there wasn't all the things and resources that are available to teens today. So, IYG was an excellent resource for people who felt very alone, a lot of times, including me. I had just met my first gay friend through another friend of ours. And so, this was a way to sort of open up the doors and meet a lot of gay people and even people our own age, which was, of course, nice. So I was a part of IYG for several years, 3 to 4 years, and they were great times, great years. But in that time, looking back and knowing what happened because I was there, I can tell you that for those of you who don't know, gay people were really looked down upon at that time by a lot of people. I mean, people would stand up in Congress, the U.S. Congress, like Senator Jesse Helms from North Carolina or others like him, and they would say terrible things about us and how, we were very ungodly and immoral and perverts, and well, some are, but I wouldn't group everyone like that. He had just a very bigoted streak against gay people, and I think that was proven over and over again. But he's just one example. So it was not at all a problem for someone to get up and say something homophobic, and believe me, they didn't get in trouble for it like they do today. Today, if somebody says something in the sports world or in, Congress or something like that, they get taken to task and they have to give an apology or go to rehab or something. But, they can't get away with it. Back then, they got away with it with no problem because nobody, it wasn't unusual. It wasn't different for people to express dislike, hate, basically, although they might not have called it that, and definitely offensive things that, yeah, we found it offensive, but we were used to it. So that in itself has changed a lot over the years. Another thing I think that happened in this 30 years was that at some point, and I think a lot of it had to do with talk shows like Phil Donahue and Oprah Winfrey and Sally Jesse and the others. There were so many at one time. that gay people became guests a lot. And that included lesbians and, older gays and younger gays and lesbians of all sorts. And it was really a trendy topic on those shows. And I think that was the first way that people were really exposed to those of us who lived an alternative lifestyle. And it turned out to be a good thing because people got sort of used to it. I mean, when we were back in those days and when I was in high school, nobody talked about being gay. I mean, it did not come up. And there were a couple guys over my 4 years in high school that were obviously gay and people would know about it, but they didn't talk about it that much, at least that I heard. And it was sort of like hush hush, but it was not a topic that most people ever talked about. And when somebody was found out that that actually did come up, not in high school, but I mean in other situations, it was like some strange thing that people just didn't understand. They couldn't grasp why two men would possibly want to have sex together or love each other or live together. I mean, I'll never forget a Phil Donahue show that I was watching, which happened to feature gay porn stars back then, and this was, quite a ways back. And people were just almost barbaric to those guys that were brave enough to show their faces. They weren't hiding behind anything, and they weren't anonymous. But they just didn't get it. So then you had shows come out like starting with Soap and Dynasty, where there were gay characters, although not always a good representation or not allowed to be true to themselves. I was a huge Dynasty fan, still am. But what they did with the character of Steven was almost criminal. I mean, he couldn't make up his mind what he wanted to be. And that's just not like most gay men are not switching back and forth each episode of a week. So, it was good that we had the representation because back then that was very, very rare. But, it wasn't the best representation. Even once you got to Melrose Place and they had the character of Matt, they would not show those two men kissing. When the two men went to kiss finally, after many, many episodes, they cut away to, I believe, the moon or something. So they didn't show it because they knew there would be protests. They knew there would be trouble, so they just didn't do it. Anyway, fast forward to the Will and Grace and the Ellen kind of time period where I'm talking about Ellen's original comedy show and of course Will and Grace, the infamous or famous sitcom. That's what to me really mainstreamed gay people in this country and brought the fear or took the fear away from gay people, from just the average person. They suddenly realized that, guess what? We're not that different. Yes, we are different and we have some great differences, but we're living our lives like people and we want the same love and respect as those people. So that was such a positive thing for our community. I think that there was such change between that time period and the early 2000s that it was just amazing. Now, what we hadn't gotten into is the rights that we've earned in the last 10 years. I mean, starting 10 years ago this year, when Massachusetts became the first state to get gay marriage or same-sex marriage, that was just immense. And I remember being in Texas visiting a friend of mine and hearing that news and just being blown away that there was going to be a state in this country that had gay marriage. Was just, I mean, it's just startling, or it was at the time. So obviously in a good way. But we've had a lot of progress, as you all know, since then. And I think the other thing that has happened is that, as I said earlier, it's no longer okay for someone, a celebrity, several come to mind recently, who have gotten in trouble with the media, with the public, and with all kinds of other, like sometimes their association if they're a sports figure, or their TV show if they're on TV. like Isaiah Washington when he was on Grey's Anatomy, for instance. People actually get in trouble for saying negative things and saying homophobic things. So it's become more like if a celebrity or someone famous says something negative about someone of a different race, they're taken to task for it. And now that's true for us as well. So that's great. But I think even more importantly are the rights we've gained in the last 10 years. And I do think a lot of that has to do with some of the presidential administrations we've had. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about George Bush, because as I'm sure some of you remember, George Bush, and I'm talking about George W. Bush, made it in 2004. He made it almost, well, I'm going to say a political effort to demonize gay people and to talk about putting in a national ban on gay marriage or same-sex marriage, partially because of what happened in Massachusetts. Also, things that had happened in Hawaii where they were trying to get same-sex marriage. So, in the 2004 election, we really felt like we were getting thrown over the cliff. There were so many bad things that happened in that election with losses and different states getting constitutional bans. So it was a very negative year. And of course, we got another 4 years of George Bush. So that was not good either. But after that, roll forward to 2008. And of course, we had a much different president with Barack Obama and a much different environment. It suddenly was becoming out of touch, let's say, to demonize gay people. And they were starting to look like the ones who were wrong for doing that. And yes, we did lose some more that year, for instance, with Prop 8, but we all know how that has turned out since then. So that's great. But, you know, it took a lot of hard work, and a lot of people worked very hard at this. And I think one of the biggest things that happened was when Joe Biden came out for same-sex marriage right before the president did. When those two did both, I think in the same time, you know, same couple months of early 2008, I believe it was, that really pushed things forward. I think that changed a lot of people's minds, or helped to change their minds. And of course, since 2008, we've gained so much with rights, and the states, you know, we've gotten up to now, I believe, 20 states recognizing or allowing gay or same-sex marriage. And of course, also the District of Columbia. And then, of course, last year was the biggest news of all with the Windsor case and the Prop 8 case being decided by the Supreme Court last June, 1 year ago. It'll be 1 year this week ago that those decisions came out, and that was just humongous. That opens so many doors for so many people, and I think unless you're a gay person or you're really close to a gay person, you can't understand how much that meant to some of us. And for me personally, for instance, after almost 15 years being with my partner, we got married last September, and we gained the rights of a lot of other married couples by doing that. We never had that opportunity before. We wouldn't have had it before June of last year. So 3 months later, we took advantage of that. We had to go out of state to do it. We had to leave Indiana, which still doesn't recognize our marriage, and we had to go to New York. But it was a great trip, and I'm just glad we had the opportunity, because I never ever would have thought that could possibly happen. I mean, honestly, I never thought about getting married because it wasn't even a thought in my mind that it was going to ever be possible. I'm talking ever in my lifetime. So for it to happen at such a young age, well, then, you know, what can I say? I'm just very grateful. The other thing that did was make it so that even though Indiana doesn't recognize our marriage, we've got all these cases now that are going forward. This year here in Indiana, we also had one other big thing I want to mention, which is that Freedom Indiana and a lot of volunteers and people fought very hard to keep that constitutional ban off the ballot this year, and they succeeded. We succeeded. And so it's not going to be on the ban in November. And I have to also be honest here and say I didn't think that was going to happen. I told Mike last year, I think this is a great effort and we should try as hard as we can, but I don't see enough people in this Congress of Indiana changing their mind to keep that off the ballot. And I was wrong, and I'm so glad that I was wrong. So I just want to close by saying that the progress that has been made in this last 30 years, when we've gone from being reviled in the halls of Congress among many other places, churches for instance, to being sort of the trendy thing or the popular thing, everyone wants a gay best friend kind of thing. It's just amazing, and that's a novelty. That's not something I'm worried about. But what I am interested in is the human rights that we've been able to establish and gain, and the fight is going to go on. And I truly think that in the next year or two, it's all going to be over for those who are against same-sex marriage. One of these cases is going to work their way to the Supreme Court, or maybe more than one, and probably next year this time, we may have a decision that ends all the rest of this, so that the other 30 states at least have to recognize marriage from a different state that you have, like what Mike and I have. So with that, I'm going to close for today on this Pride edition of the show. And thank you all for watching. And thank Cher for always looking over my shoulder. And I love Cher and her music. So take care, everybody. And I'll see you next time.